Namaskarams to all. I do not know what transpired from the morning till now. I had a few words exchanged with Arnab. I know it must have been a very focused and a very highly specialized sessions. But I will be talking from a silo-free, a kind of a helicopter presentation. Somebody sent me a video yesterday about a video of Bertrand Russell's discussion with someone. And Bertrand Russell said, what changes have taken place since I began knowing about the world and today? It is phenomenal, unbelievable the world would have changed in such a short time as my life. But applying it to what has transpired in the last 1 year, I don't think the world would have ever, anybody, the best brains, the most intricate think tanks could have visualized what happened in the world after the Ukraine war. Any time before that, the world has completely changed. In fact, there is no rule which was applicable before the Ukraine war is capable of being applied after the Ukraine war. This is the kind of change that has taken place. In fact, the whole thrust of globalization, the world as one little village, these are all completely outdated today. We have to find a new way of working the world. It is in this background I will be presenting where India was maybe 10 years back and where India is today and where the world is today and the world will be, say, in the next 10 years and where India will stand in that world. The changes are tectonic. And the post-war geopolitical world order, from being a world led by a hegemonic power, has become a world of diffused powers. Today there is no hegemonic power. In fact, it is much worse than the Cold War rivalry, where there were two blocks trying to control the world or being competitive about one another. But today, this is a kind of a, I wouldn't call it anarchic, but the world is so diverse today in terms of power shared economically, politically, and culturally, and in terms of demography, that the world order which was formulated after the Second World War, which was reformulated after the Cold War, is not under severe threat as many people say. It is not just under a challenge. It has been deformed. Henry Kissinger said that the world order will be restructured permanently. Who is going to restructure it? There is not one axiomatic power or brain or institution which can rearticulate the world today. In fact, George Soros is perhaps very near what can be the true position. He said there is likely to be a civilizational collapse of the West. This is the most appropriate understanding of the world because the world was run by the Western way of doing things. In fact, many people, whenever I have quoted in IIT or IIM or many research institutions, they were not even aware the philosophic and ideological drive for the world that was articulated by none less than the United Nations in the year 1951. I think in the last Republic session I quoted it, but I think it is worth quoting it again because these are not things which are current in the public discourse. So I would like to start the session with how the United Nations constituted an expert committee in 1949 and came out with a report in 1951, which of course had some kind of a representative from India also who belonged to Pune. And they submitted a report in which the core idea is what I am going to quote from what they say. There is a sense in which rapid economic progress is impossible without painful adjustments. Ancient philosophies have to be scrapped. Old social institutions have to disintegrate. Bonds of caste, creed, and race have to burst. And large number of persons who cannot keep up with progress have to have their expectations of comfortable life frustrated. Very few communities are willing to pay the full price for economic progress. This is the extension of the Western anthropology of modernity. Modernity, which we are thinking as something which is progressive about, world always keeps changing. The contemporary world would never be the same as it was 100 years back. But modernity has another orientation that unless the world is characterized in terms of the Western civilization, Western way of life, and Western food habits, and Western etc., it is not modern. There cannot be a Tamil-speaking modern Indian. There cannot be Hindi-speaking modern Indian. There cannot be a person wearing tikka who is a modern Indian. Because modern Indian has a definition. This is how the world was turned into a one-size-fit-all model. Not only in terms of the intellectual orientation, but also in terms of psychological, physical orientation, cultural orientation, and sensitivities, how to eat, how not to eat. The whole way of shaping the world in a particular manner, this was devised. And that is precisely what was not only recommended in 1951, it was accepted in 1990s as the post-Cold War world order. Everybody accepted in the name of globalization, and we began propagating it in a big way. And now what is happening is, these tectonic changes have challenged this formulation. In fact, the very idea of modernity has undergone a change in the last 7-8 years in the Western academia. There is nothing called one source of modernity. Every civilization has a way of renewing itself. Modernity is an evolution which takes place within each civilization, and there is no one dominant civilization which shows the way to modernity. This is now an accepted position. Professor Hunt, who did the greatest research in this, has said that every nation, every civilization has a way of modernizing itself in the sense in which they are able to say this will not suit the future. And this is not the discourse in India, because the Indian discourse is still not original. Of course, we have been able to discard this Asiatic model, which was being suggested as a sign of India cannot become a modern society at all. This is how we were put in the category of people who can never modernize ourselves. This is based on formulation that a society which follows Hinduism and Buddhism cannot modernize itself and cannot become a successful economy. This was the model that was suggested for our public discourse, for our academia, for our media, for our government. This is a big story which I partly told in my previous session. Now, from there, what is the change that is taking place? Change from a world of one monetary and financial order and one money into a world of multiple monetary orders, multiple finances, and multiple monies. This is something unthinkable. This could not have been imagined 5 years back. And it is now becoming a reality. Japan and China Japan and China are almost like undeclared enemies. But they have come to an understanding that for $300 billion, they will have non-dollar transaction in mutual national currencies. This is not even known outside. You have to Google and get this information. So this one money driving the world is also being departed from. And challenges from autocracies to liberal democracies. You know, in 1990, when globalization came, the West proclaimed that liberal democracy and free market have won the game once and for all, and is the best for the rest to follow the Western liberal democracy and free market economy. This was an open declaration. The entire post-Cold War order, institutions, finance, everything was founded on that basis. Now that is being challenged. Not because of anything, because in the international monetary, financial and trade order, in which democratic rules operated, transparency operated, for its own selfish purposes, America brought in China, which was non-transparent, has nothing to do with the democracy. They all said we will co-opt. In fact, Clinton went to the extent of saying that when we co-opt China into the world economy, it will not only that we will be exporting our goods, we will all be exporting our ideas, virtually saying China will democratize. That was the base on which China was brought in. Today, China is the biggest autocratic challenge, making use of the transparent rules through their non-transparent statecraft. A Marxist economy cannot operate in a market economy. So there is a challenge from the Marxist market economy to the free market economy. These are all the challenges which are coming today, for which within the Western formulation, rules, regulations, institutions, there is no answer. It is in this background, India is assuming the leadership of G20. See, G20 was a formulation which was found necessary because G7 and G8 were unable to handle the enlarging dimensions of the world finance, world issues. In fact, terrorism was one of the reasons why G20 acquired a very important place, because these transactions, monetary and financial banking transactions, needed to become apparent if the world were to live in peace, because wrong money and terror have got together. And actually, G20 acquired its prominence only after 2008, particularly after 2015. And now it has a certain role to play. Otherwise, it was only a debating club. Today, it has a value. And we have now become the president of India, and the Prime Minister Modi is now the president of G20. The Prime Minister made two propositions. We have to test whether these two propositions are just slogans or have they any meaning. Is India legitimate in suggesting it? Has it the moral and legitimate power to make these two propositions? One is, he talked about Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam as a philosophy for the world. It would look that he is recalling some 5,000 years of civilizational value for the contemporary and future world. But I will explain to you how relevant it is, and it is in terms of figures. It is in terms of the current and future world. So, because we have not understood our way of working, we have not understood our philosophy, we have not understood our lifestyle, we are not able to understand what the idea of Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam is. So that will be one of the major portions I will be explaining to you today. Second is, he came to a more practical subject, high debt free and environmentally comforting development model. You see, these are all very freely spoken. Anybody can speak about it. In fact, environment is now the discourse of the West, which is doing the greatest damage to environment for not today, for the last 50, 60 years. If you look at the contribution that the West has made to damage the environment, the total greenhouse gas emission till today, if it is turned into percentages and saddled on the countries which have contributed the maximum, till now, all the greenhouse gases taken together, aggregated together, 25% of the contribution has come from America. Till now. in the history. European Union, 22%. China, 13%. India, 3%. With how much population? 18% of world's population. Russia, 6%. This small little Ukraine, 1.2%. See the amount of damage these guys have done to the world, and they are the ones who have now got on to the environment paradigm and telling us what we should do. And I'm going to tell you what we have to say and what we do not know what to say because of the inadequacy of Indian intellectualism, Indian understanding about itself, because India is one subject about which India was never told in our academia, in our government discourse, in the public discourse. I am going to tell you this. So are these empty slogans? No. You know, in India, many people, the West, there is say, you precept and practice. What you say, you must practice. But our philosophy is different. Swadhyaya pravachana. This is what the Vedas say. You must practice and then only speak. It's a completely different thing. Unless you practice, you cannot speak. The entire geopolitics today is based on whether you practice or not, you should speak well. The articulation, the capacity, the institutional arrangement, the media power that you have, all that has put practice irrelevant, precept more relevant, because the people who are speaking are more capable, more articulate, more powerful. We are not that. We actually practice. How do we practice? This is what I want to tell you. India practices Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam. First point. This Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam is integrated in two aspects. One is environmental culture and two, cultural economics. I am going to emphasize this because these are not things which, you speak through flowery words. No. You have to support it by hard facts. Now I will take you to the whole idea of environment, because this is the most important paradigm the world is now holding in its hand to keep the rest under check. The rest does not know, including China. I don't see there is any Asian narrative of environment. So how important it is for us to develop our own narrative based on facts, narrative based on undisputed facts. What I am mentioning to you is facts gathered from ourworlddata.com, which is an important, all the Western universities, including Harvard University, are members of this. This is undisputed facts I am mentioning to you. If you look at the world, nature has arranged the world in such a manner. 71% of the world is water, 21% is land. In the body also, 71% of your body composition consists of liquid. There is an alignment between the microcosm and the macrocosm. It's all, nature has arranged it in such a manner, any disturbance anywhere will ultimately hurt the man, because nature is very reactive. It's punishing and it cannot excuse you. So in this, of the 29% land, the habitable land is about 20-odd%. And of the habitable land, 10% is agricultural land. And of the 10% agricultural land, 8% is used for livestock farming. And 2.4% used for crop farming. You understand what it is? In such a huge world, only 2.4% is used for crop farming. 8% is used for cattle farming. Now you come to calories. 83% of the calories come from crop farming, for which you are devoting only 2.4% of the land area. And only 17% of the calories come from the area 8% devoted for cattle farming. And take protein. 63% of the protein comes from 2.4% area devoted for crop farming. And 37% comes from the cattle farming. Now, you come to India. You know, we have just 2% of world's land area. We have 18% of world's population. We have 30% of world's cattle population. We have 8% of world's bioresources. And 33% of, one-third of these bioresources are found nowhere in the world. And repeatedly, India has been given awards by different global bodies for its capacity to preserve the bioresources. How is it that 18% population on a 2% land area with 30% of the global cattle population is able to feed itself? This is a question which every Indian university, thinking institutions, government bodies, media is supposed to ask. I'll tell you how. If you look at the per capita land available, in the world it is 0.63 hectare per head. It is 1.27 in America, 0.43 in China, 0.13 in India. We have only 0.13 hectare agricultural land per capita available. Then how are we managing? It is because of our food style. It is our food style which enables us not only to feed ourselves and keep us in comfort, we are also in a position to supply food to the world. How? It's not a statistical jugglery. There is a science of taking food. You go to Kerala, they have a science of having food. In Tamil Nadu, there is a science of food. Anywhere you go, there is a science. Food is taken on the basis of the traditional culinary formula. So, if there is ourworldindia.com has worked out a beautiful formulation. Let us assume if the whole world shifts to the American way of taking food. From tomorrow onwards, all Indians, all Chinese, all Asians shift to American way of taking food. Ourworldindia.com says we will need 140% of the agricultural land the world has today. We will need 40% more land than the world has today if everybody were to shift to American way of eating food. You come to India. If the whole world takes to the Indian way of taking food, we will need only, you will not believe, we will need only 40% of the agricultural land we are using for agriculture. This is not my data. This is ourworldindata.com, which is an undisputed source of information. But tell me, which Indian university, which Indian think tank, which Indian IIT, which Indian government formulated papers bring out this fact? The only thing is, we also eat meat. You know, majority of the Indians eat meat. They say it is as much as 60-65%. There are variations in estimate, but it is somewhere 1/3 of the Indians are not meat eaters. 2/3 of the Indians are meat eaters. But meat is not our main food. Meat is our sabji. Our main food is cereal. It is the reverse in the West. With the result, our per capita meat consumption today is 3.1 kg per head. It is 109 kg per head in America. It is 84 kg per head in European Union. Most environmentally damaging eating habit. The most environmentally compatible food habit we have. Don't you think you must pass laws to preserve your food habits? You must have a huge campaign to preserve it. Dosa, idli, vada, paratha. These are all going to save you. But if you bring in more the McDonald's and burgers, it is not only you will be damaged, the world will be damaged. So when we say Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam, it is not that we are comfortable with each other, we are comfortable with every living creation in the world. Otherwise, you cannot have, what is the cattle population of India? 300 million. It is 257 million in Brazil, 95 million in China, 94 million in America, 89 million in European Union. See how we are taking care of cattle 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the number. How? It is not that cattle is just an edible proposition. It is our friend. It's part of agriculture. It's part of homes. It's worshipped. Do we understand? Otherwise, why should we keep 300 million cattle? And livestock is 500 million. These are the implications of the idea of Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam. I come from a village. In fact, I have a feeling, unless you come from a village, you cannot understand India. I'm sorry I am making a very judgmental statement, because this is how I have come across whenever I have dealt with Indian intellectuals who are very proficient in English. They have a very sad and bad idea about a village. I think that is where you understand the value of life. For example, in our village, you can't cut a tree. If somebody is pregnant in that village, you have to go and take the permission of the pregnant woman's family to cut the tree. We built a house in Chennai. In fact, any of you can come to my house and see. It is almost in the center of the house. There was a neem tree. We decided we cannot cut the tree. We gave up almost 2,000 square feet of constructed area for the tree to survive. And it is being worshipped in our house. These are not things which you can cultivate by education. This you cannot cultivate by mere giving lectures or reading books. This is part of the Indian DNA. This is what is Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam. When the Prime Minister spoke about Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam, he didn't speak about what was stated in our Vedas or Upanishads, but it is a functioning reality. So, this is the first point. And if, let us assume one more point I would like to mention, if all Indians shift to the American way of eating, we will need 6 times the agricultural land we have today. Not only that, the land that will be needed will be 2.5 times the size of India itself. You understand how important it is to preserve our food habits? In the interest of your own survival, in the interest of, if all Indians, 1.4 billion Indians, begin eating meat in the way the Americans do, there will be no world. It will be over. But do we understand that? Our meat consumption, which was 5.2 kilos per head, has come down to 3.1. There is a 30% reduction. Did anyone campaign for that? People are feeling that you must touch meat and you should not eat meat. So if you have a desire for meat, you eat. But you don't substitute it for other things. Sabji is the way, vegetables are there, your cereals are there. You know the number of cereal varieties in India, the rice varieties in India, at one point in time, 100,000. Today you have 22,000 varieties of rice preserved in India. The cereal varieties in India are almost 200,000. In the entire West, the cereal varieties put together is not more than 200. Because diversity is there only in the non-Western part of the world. You know, if I remember right, in Chile, I think it is Chile, you know, they began importing the Western food. And they had a protein-rich food called, cereal called amaranth. So everybody began eating the Western barley, wheat and things like that, and they gave up amaranth. They found they were becoming dependent, like Kerala. Kerala imports 90% of its food from outside. It was a self-sufficient economy. Communists came and destroyed the agriculture. With the result, they have begun importing food. This happened to Chile. Then what happened? They had to take a campaign to bring back American eating habits through the media, through cinema stars, through prime ministers. Food habits are very important. Now I will come to the second thing, living habits. The way we live. In America, in the year 1960, in every house, 3.31 persons were residing. The average number of persons residing in a house was 3.31. Today it is 2.51. In the last 60 years, this change has taken place. They had to construct 31 million more houses because of that. The amount of environmental damage is incalculable. If 3.3 persons were present in the house, now it is 2.51, the environmental damage that has been calculated is enormous. 8.5 trillion is the investment they had to make to build these 31 million houses. Now come to India. We have 4.9 persons per household today. It was 5.2 in 1951, not much change. In fact, in urban areas, more people reside in the same house than even in rural areas, because in rural areas, you have enough space to build houses. Not only that, India is probably one of the most highest home-owning population in the world. 85% of the people have houses. It may be a small house, it may be some thatched roof or whatever it is, they have their own house. It is only in urban areas the housing is less. In rural areas, it's almost complete. Now, if 4.9 per head comes down by 1 to 3.9, we will be needing 51 million more houses. If we come to the American standard of just through 2.51, we will be needing 130 million more houses. Our way of adjusting families, living together, we have problems, we have difficulties. But you know how much it contributes to environment, economy, and unburdens the state, unburdens the world. Take India, it is 1/6 of humanity. If India doesn't develop, what is the problem of the world? If India and China do not develop, there will be no world. So, you need, as a country, you have to have your own style, you have to have your own model. You cannot have the human rights values of America of creating fight between father and son, brother and sister, daughter and husband and wife, and still maintain 4.9 persons per family. There is a clash between human rights and cultural values. The United Nations did not have the word diversity in its dictionary at all till 1994, when it first enacted Biodiversity Convention. 1946 it was born. In 1991 only the United Nations first came to know of some idea called diversity, because they said all the world philosophies have to be scrapped, you all have to change, you all have to become like me. Where is the diversity? You wanted the whole world homogenized on the style of what you thought would be the world. Now, biodiversity was the first diversity the United Nations discovered in 1994. Because huge destruction, like 30% of rainforests were destroyed since 1900. Then 2001 they woke up. Just like biodiversity, there is also cultural diversity. So they had the Cultural Diversity Convention in the year 2001, in which they said, if there is a clash between cultural diversity and human rights will prevail. It should be the other way. If there is a clash between family values and human rights, family values is cultural, social values is cultural, economic values is cultural. Otherwise, why should I take care of my parent? Why should I educate my brother? Why should I educate my sister? Why? Because we are a relation-based society. We are not a contract-based society. We are not living together by contract. We have not agreed to live together. We live together because we like living together. There are problems, difficulties. And I would give the entire credit for this kind of arrangement, living arrangement, only to the women of India. They bore the burden. They bear the difficulties. They do the savings. They do the expenditure. In fact, in 2002, I delivered a lecture in America, in San Jose, which is available in Google. You can Google and get it. Where I said Indian economy is feminine in character. You know, we never waste anything. We turn waste into wealth. If you see in America, they turn wealth into waste. You see the way good cars are flattened in America. You know how to use the fifth generation. The car changes 10 hands and still it is used. We turn waste into wealth, whether in form a plastic bag or a car or a cycle or a chair. Reuse. This has become a new environmental value, which is in our DNA. So, our living style itself is a very important contributory to the idea of Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam, because you cannot, if you don't know how to live in a family, you don't know how to live as a nation, and you cannot certainly live as a global family. The idea of family is integrated value, the difficulties in living together, all this requires a cultural orientation, shaping up of mind, and subordination of the individual for a larger purpose. In Mahabharata, there is a sloka. Tyajat yegam kulasyarte, gramarte kulam tejet, gramam janapadasyarte, atmarte prithvim tejet. This is the fundamental basis of Indian politico-economy. For the welfare of the family, the individual yields his rights. For the welfare of the village, a family yields its rights. For the welfare of the nation, the village yields its rights. For a person who doesn't want any of these things, for him nothing matters, because Atmarte Prithivintejit, he has gone above the worldly requirements, and only that man is free from these obligations. Only a person who doesn't want anything from the world is free from the obligations of the family, of the society, of the nation. Now, the contemporary individualist thinkers of the West, they want everything in the world, but they don't want to do anything even to the family. With the result, today, the liberal democracies are suffering from such erosion in strength. Only 45% of the youths vote. Only 40% of the youths take interest in politics. It gives them all the rights to enjoy, but they don't want to return that right even by voting. Liberalism has not produced responsibility. It has not been able to create people who will stand by liberalism. They want to enjoy liberalism. They don't want to contribute to liberalism. But in India, it's entirely different. You know, in the West, if you see, it is the educated people vote. It is the people who have higher income vote. It is the higher strata of the people vote. The lower strata, minorities, uneducated people, they vote less. In India, it is the reverse. 75% of the minorities vote. 65% of the scheduled caste vote. 64% of the backward classes vote. It is 49% of the educated people vote. 45% of the forward caste vote. The Indian democracy's bottom strength is very heavy. You know, this research has been done by a person, Yogendra Yadav. So he can never go back upon it. So there is something very different about India. This manifests in social security. We take care of our parents. We take care of the family obligations. We educate our children. But this is not what is happening in the West. All the responsibilities are transferred to the government. Families have been nationalized. The children are not being educated by the parents. With the result, the unprovided for unfunded social obligations of the West is $62 trillion, against which the government doesn't have even $1 on hand. It is the current value of the future social security obligations. So when I say Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam, shared living, adjusting, family, community, nation, when Modi speaks about it, he speaks from the perspective of environmental culture and cultural economics. There is an integration between all the three concepts. Then he spoke about development with less debt. I'll tell you what is the debt figures of different nations, whether India can talk about it. You take the indebted nations. If you take the government debt in 2008 and 2021, the American public debt, the government debt has doubled from 65% of the GDP to 128% of the GDP. In UK, 43% to 104%. European Union, 66 to 98%. Japan, 172 to 262%. In China, 29 to 72%. In India, 66 to 85%. We have borne one of the biggest public welfare programs during the pandemic. It's not a small nation. Still, our debt is only 85% of the GDP. And our private debt is even less. In China, the private debt is, in 2008, 106% of the GDP. Now it is 197%. In India, 47% to 57% was the improvement in this period, 2008 to 2021. Our people don't borrow unnecessarily. So, when the Prime Minister said we should have growth, we should have development, we should have globalization with less debt, he has had the legitimacy to talk about it. There is a performance. So whether in terms of Vasudevaiva Kutumbakam, whether in terms of environmental culture or cultural economics, I think India has a functioning model to show to the world. This G20 is an opportunity for India to pack its ideas and present to the world. Here is an alternative model, functioning model. It is not a theoretical model. It is not something which we have brought from libraries. It is working on the ground. So this opportunity has come to India. But the Prime Minister is aware. The Prime Minister knows. But how many people in the country know? I don't know. How many academic institutions can present an alternative thought to the Western academic institutions? I do not know. How many in the media can present an alternative living model to the world? I don't know. In fact, we are swallowing and vomiting their own idea of human rights without knowing how much it damages your own family, your own community, your own nation. You know, human rights is now available only for anarchists. The court is concerned with the human rights of terrorists. It is concerned with the human rights of Naxalites. This perversion, which can damage not only the security of the country, but the economy of the country, environment. Do we present it that way? You have to have a human face, an environmental face, a community face, an economic face to the concept of human rights. Human rights cannot stand alone. It has to work with other dimensions of life. This is not the way we think. We just vomit, we just swallow and vomit. Whatever the Western think tanks say, we quote them. I mean, 1/6 of humanity cannot become the carbon copy of 1/16 of humanity. We need very original thinkers, courageous thinkers, who are willing to take the blame for saying the truth and an alternative to what is being assumed as truth, which is not the truth. So we need because India is no more a pushover. You know, India's position today in the world is highly legitimate. India's rise is legitimate. I will just give what are the internal drives to India's legitimate. Any country can rise. For instance, this Hitler also rose. It was not a legitimate rise. Now Xi Jinping is rising. It is not a legitimate rise. It's a problem. It's a difficulty. Now, if you look at India's rise in the past 7-8 years, strong government from 1989 to 2014, we had rickety coalitions. Nobody bothered about it. It was in that period China rose. The West did not look at India because it did not have a government. You had 1.5 years government, 1 year government, half-year government. We have a stable government, strong government. Scam-free rule, leak-free government schemes, digital governance, ease of doing business, rise of organized financing and banking. Nowhere in the world you could see a government opening bank accounts for 420 million people, of which 390 million bank accounts are operational with funds in a matter of 6 years. It has never happened in the world. Then, clearance of historical baggages, Article 370, Ram Janmabhoomi, we were saddled with this for 6 decades, 7 decades. Settling the past is a very, these are all the things which the West sees. No country will be respectable unless it keeps its house in order. We have been able to do it only in the past 6-7 years. We have never been able to do it in the past. We always saw Kashmir as a problem. Today we are seeing Kashmir as a model. How to develop Kashmir. Today, you must have read about in the newspapers how Kashmir tourism has jumped. A total change of picture. There is no gun-trotting terrorists. They have all been eliminated. And they will continue to be eliminated. And Pakistan, which was always threatening India, it has come out with a statement. We have learned the lesson from three wars we had with India. Do we expect this to happen 10 years back? In fact, one Pakistani writer wrote, Pakistan has been reduced to a footprint in Southeast Asia, and if it does not correct itself, it will be reduced to a footprint in history. It is no more. We are not hyphenated with Pakistan. We are matching China, whether it is Doklam, whether it is Ladakh, or it is Arunachal. There is no question that you may have economic might, you may have military might, but on the border you cannot win. India has ensured that in a border fight, there will be no victor on this side or that side. If China attacks, it has to attack beyond the borders, in which case it will not be a war between only two countries. In fact, the question came, I heard it on the highest authority. In 2020, China did say the war may not be limited to the borders. You know what was her response? You mean to say you will attack Bombay? I will ensure you there will be no Shanghai. This is the India we are seeing today. An India which will mind others threatening. It will answer. This is not the India we have seen. So, a phenomenal growth of physical and digital infra, firm action against anarchy and terror. We were haunted by terror. Today, a PFI is snuffed out. Just like that. There is not even a whim for a protest. And defense preparedness. Rise of globally accepted national leadership. For 3 years consecutively, the Morning Consult has been rating Modi as the tallest leader of the world. And all other democratic leaders 10 points, 12 points, 15 points below. This is not our assessment. It is their assessment. And victory in the war against COVID. This Swadeshi vaccine, we were beggars of vaccine. Any disease which came from outside, we have to go and beg for vaccine. They will give us 2 years, 3 years later. We made the vaccine, effective vaccine, which has prevented the disease from growing. We are almost free. Today I was seeing our COVID numbers is less than 100. But do we talk about it? The West knows it. They see the rise of India legitimate. You are no more dependent on somebody developing in their laboratories and you are going and begging, please give me. You are exporting. You have given vaccine to 100 countries in the world. Now, the external thing. I told you about handling of neighbors. Terror, Uri and Balakot. Afterwards, there was no cross-border terror of a magnitude India had to fear about. And then I told you about Ladakh. And amid COVID time, Jaishankar, who had come for the Tughlaq function, he told me, he told the audience, when the Chinese thought if they attacked India at the time when COVID was raging in India, India will not be able to repulse the attack. We gave them back. It was shocking for China. It's a different India. And India has a global pharmacy, now handling geopolitics. We have the traditional ally in Russia. We have the strategic ally in US. US can't give us up. You know why? The liberal democracy in India or in the world is only 13% of world's population. More than half the world is under autocracy. If we don't stand with the liberal democracies, there will be no liberal democracy in the world. These guys were rating Indian democracy. It's not liberal. Now they say, come on, you are part of us. Why? We are not a liberal democracy. We will not be a liberal democracy. We should not be a liberal democracy. We are a civilizational democracy. We recognize all the constituents of there are caste-based parties, there are religion-based parties, there are language-based parties. These are all completely anti-liberalism. But we recognize all that. We have a functioning democracy. We are able to tick together, work together, speak together, travel together, grow together. It's not a joke. Nowhere in the world, when France was formed, when Italy was formed, less than 2% of these people spoke French language. Less than 1% of these people spoke Italian language. They were all constructed as state by the might of the king. India evolved because of its civilizational model. Mahatma Gandhi mentions it in Hind Swaraj. You must all read. The man who understood India, he told the British how India remains one. It remains one because of its civilizational values. People travel from one end of the country to the other. M.J. Akbar wrote, the greatest unifier of India was Adi Shankara. Do we understand all this? This cannot happen by army. It cannot happen by state power. It's an evolution. That's why every time the West thought India would collapse, it never obliged them. It's now rising. It has shaken the West. Now, special relations will anyone with Modi, BJP, Hindutva, RSS, all the campaign, Middle Eastern countries are our closest allies. Then Pakistan being reduced to footprint in history. Emergence as a regional leader. Today, nobody can challenge us in the region. I am not going to Upper Asia. I am talking about down. Then civilizational and strategic ties with Israel. We have ties with every one of consequence in the world. We have special ties with France, which is vetoing any attempt of the European Union against India. See the geopolitical strategies we have made. So, on the Ukraine stand, the world was shaken, Western world, by the stand that Modi took. Because it has a history. The West kept on expanding the NATO. Russia begged. He said, we will join the NATO. Please don't expand the NATO. We are willing to join the European Union. These were all the appeals that Russia was making. Yeltsin and all these people went, don't expand. The Cold War is over. The Americans thought they had won and it is their responsibility and the duty and the obligation to rule the world. It was in fact, Henry Kissinger, who knew about geopolitics more than anyone else in the world, advised the Americans not to go for NATO expansion, not to go for grabbing Ukraine. But some joint secretary wrote a note, this is an opportunity for us to rule the world. A joint secretary in America wrote a note that was accepted and that landed in America in a mess, the world in a mess. We knew the background of the Ukraine war. And so we said in Ukraine war, you cannot say it is unjust. We are not going to say it is just or unjust. With the result, we have been able to manage our energy crisis so well. We have been able to reframe the energy economy of the world. If India had not taken that position, I don't think Middle East countries would have been able to stand up to America. You must understand how it is like an echo. So, India is at the center of geopolitics today. India, as the largest and the powerful country in terms of geography, in terms of technology, in terms of every other thing which the world values today, we are now a very important factor. India as the only democratic alternative to the world. If India is not there with the democratic countries, I can tell you democratic countries will be reduced to mere islands in the world. You may have ICBM atom bombs. What will you do? Your geopolitical reach, influence will not be there. You need India. So my feeling is that our time has come. In fact, I only remember what Ratan Tata said. I will close with that. He said, my only regret is I am not 20 years younger, because I think that India is going through a very exciting period in its history. I also feel I am 74. I don't know whether I will be able to see that India for which you all worked for 50 years, the India of our dream. Many of you will be able to see it. Thank you very much.